Okay, this is going to be a lot of fun today. Coe Starr is our presenter today, and he's born in Oak Ridge. He's always been passionate about wildlife. And he got his first job by casually picking up a few snakes in front of the right people. And he transitioned to studying birds in college. Since then, has traveled the world for research, consulting, and plain old bird watching. His academic background is behavioral ecology, and as such, he focuses his designs and practices on maximizing the benefits to birds through understanding their needs and behaviors. So I met Lucas at the Oak Ridge Farmers Market indoor and bought some of his food, but he's very knowledgeable about things that I'll bet a lot of us might be interested in related to birds. And he's the Oak Ridge Birdman. Yeah. So if you put this on while you talk, and there you go. Thanks, Lucas.
I was going to say, what kind of range do I have on this? How far do I go before I start disrupting electronics?
Move around a little bit.
Let me move this just a little bit closer then.
Yeah, go ahead. That would be a good idea.
All right, everybody read me okay out there? All right. Sorry? All right. I figured. Hello, everybody at home out there, too. Thank y'all for tuning in. I got to thank Tony for inviting me down here. If y'all are particularly interested in what I have to say, feel free to come and talk to me after the meeting. I've got business cards, and I'm happy to stay and chat. If y'all don't like what I have to say, blame Tony. So for what it counts, besides being a gigantic nerd about birds, as he said, I'm also a professional ornithologist. So I've done plenty of research in what they like to eat, how they like to go about it, how far I have to lean down to get the acoustics right. All sorts of stuff. I try and think of where to start on this because I can go on about birds for a long time, as y'all might guess. Just curious, does anybody out there, how many, like a quick show of hands for how many folks actually do enjoy feeding birds or housing them or anything? Okay, that's all right. So I'm preaching to the choir here is what y'all are saying. And y'all know it's about time to start getting those boxes up out there too. I could give y'all a good deal of background in the behavioral ecology about this stuff if y'all care to hear, but I think first and foremost, I'll just try and keep it simple and talk about what I've got right here today. What I've got right here are what I consider the three most essential parts of having a suitable nesting, I'd say a nest box for birds. And I draw a distinction with a bird house because while they're often used interchangeably, what you have in a nest box is specifically a birdhouse is primarily for ornamentation. It's pretty to look at. It's mostly for human eyes, whereas a nest box is something that's specifically designed to cater to the needs of our obligate cavity nesting species. So what that means is basically the kind of birds that live around here and need to find a hole in a tree in order to raise their young. There are plenty of ways birds like to do that. Some do it in bushes, some do it at the top of trees, some do it in the middle, some do it in the grass. But the species that we have around here, smallest, say, starting with house wrens, Carolina chickadees, of course, the eastern bluebird, our various woodpecker species, all the way up to things the size of barn owls, barred owls, and hooded mergansers, are all obligate cavity nesters. So what you do in making one of these and setting it out is try and imitate the kind of habitat that they need in order to raise their young in a hole in a tree. So there are a number of selection criteria that they go for. Basically, birds, when they're raising their young, they're very picky about how they do it and the environment that they do it in. So what I've got right in here, let me just open this guy up here. No mail today, I guess. What we have in here, this is designed, didn't do myself any favors picking where to stand right here. Birds, when they pick a cavity to nest in, are looking for some very specific things. They like to have a certain area available in the bottom. They like to have a certain height from the bottom of the entry hole there down to the floor of the cavity. It's often tempting to think that if you have a very big, birds would be like us. They want as much space as they can get in a given space. But actually, it's kind of the opposite. They do a lot better with about as tight of quarters as they can get because when they're bringing their nesting material in there, if they do so, it means it requires much less work for them to get a suitable space. So if you look at this and think, that looks a little tight for anybody to move into, that's kind of the point. That's what they like. This particular nest box is designed for eastern bluebirds. Of course, anything smaller can move in quite easily also. You can look at it and think, oh, I want something that's going to be very spacious. I've seen bluebirds regularly nest in 4-inch PVC pipes with a hole in the top. So they're clearly not too turned off by having somewhat constricted quarters. I feel like that actually gives them a sense of security in there too, that they can feel all the walls around and know that nobody's going to sneak up behind them while they're there in the box. There are a big variety of styles for Eastern bluebird houses out there. Some of them have, for instance, just a circular hole that they enter through. Some of them have an oval hole like this. Some of them have just a sort of horizontal slot across the top. The thing is, all of these offer different benefits. The main thing to remember is that you can select, you don't necessarily get to select the smallest bird that's going to enter the nest box that you put up, but you do get to select the largest bird. And so, for instance, the type of entrance that I've put here, the oval entrance, is very good at keeping anything larger than Eastern bluebirds out. Starlings, for instance, are a big problem. They often evict birds from their nests to take over once the other birds have done all the work. But this also means that, for instance, just trying to think of another cavity nesting species, great crested flycatchers are not going to move in here. You need a larger hole for that. And of course, you're probably not going to get a screech owl or a woodpecker in this also. But in any case, bluebirds really like this kind of design. One, because it keeps larger birds out, but two, it ensures that there's lots of good air circulation in there too. Those of you who've used wooden nest boxes before will often see they have holes drilled into the side, yeah? And that's meant to provide some sort of cross ventilation across the top. What I found interesting when I was designing this particular box is that in all the designs for round and oval hole boxes, they had holes drilled in the side, which seems, to my mind at least, to make the nest box potentially very drafty and not just well ventilated, because, you know, bluebirds will start nesting in March. And so they're going to be freezing there sitting on the nest, and we're having weather like we've had this past week, for instance. If you have a slot box or something that allows a lot of air circulation through the front, though, rather than through the sides, you get the benefits of, you know, by convection. When the birds are in there heating up the box, the hot air rises. What that'll do is, if you have enough circulation or air circulation through the front of the box, it means that that hot air rises and goes out and pulls cooler air in. So it provides a very natural sort of ventilation, just like they'd have in a tree cavity or anything like that. Another thing you want to make sure that your boxes have whenever you're setting up, whether it's my design, whether it's just a wooden one you get from the store or anything like that, or if you're building them yourself at home, you want to make sure they have a certain degree of overhang over the front too, and over any of the ventilation holes, because that's going to make sure that you're not getting rainwater dripping in, pushed by the wind or anything like that, that effectively makes the nest soggy, moldy, all sorts of nasty stuff. Because birds, I love them, but they're not the cleanest animals. And it can get if you don't have proper drainage or protection from water getting in the first place, it can make for a very gross home environment. Also, another benefit I like of having the lip on here too is if you have a hawk sitting right on top, it's going to have a tough time getting its leg inside to grab any tasty bits on the inside. So beyond the benefits of the nest box itself, a lot of folks always come up and ask me about this big guy right here. Actually, tell you what, so the top doesn't flop open, let me close them up real quick. For what it counts, this little mechanism right here on the side too, it's literally a carpentry nail. But that means that if you have a raccoon make your way up, they're not going to be able to reach inside and pull that door open and get everybody on the inside. Now, this right here is what I consider one of the most important features of any sort of nest box setup. I'll give you all a better view over here too. This is a baffle. I'm sure a number of you, or most of you have probably seen all the varieties of things that you can put on the front of the box to try and keep folks out. You know, the little metal thing around the side to keep squirrels from chewing it, or potentially the little hardware cloth tube that's supposed to keep raccoons and snakes from being able to get in. Those are all great, but they're very limited to one particular type of nest predator that might be coming in. I personally favor the baffle, because that can stop just about anybody, and the baffle and the pole in particular. If you set a pole with a baffle at the right height, one, when the birds are looking for the right kind of place to actually have their nest, besides the features of the cavity itself, one of the things they're often looking for is to have a particular height off the ground. Some birds will, nest 2 or 3 feet up. Some birds will only nest 20 or 30 feet up in a tree, even the cavity nesters. Bluebirds, they like somewhere between 4 and 6. So having a 5-foot pole like this is very convenient. So they're nice and happy with how this is set up. But if you all just have the pole, squirrels will get in there. Squirrels will absolutely eat baby birds any chance they can get. We like to think they just eat nuts and seeds and things like that. But no, in my bird banding days, I've had to save many a bird from a chipmunk or a squirrel. that found its way into the bottom of a net. It'll keep raccoons off because even though they've got a bit more of a wingspan to them, it's really tough to get your arms around and actually grip onto this smooth surface. And probably most important of all, it'll keep the snakes away. They really can't get up this. The main thing I urge people to remember too is when they're setting up a pole, you want to have it at least the distance, I call it the 5-7-9 rule. You want to have it at least 5 feet. You want to have the baffle at least 5 feet up because that's about the highest that a squirrel can jump. 7 feet out because that's about the furthest they can leap from something on the side, and about 9 feet down, which is about the furthest they can safely drop, though Lord knows there are some real thrill chaser squirrels out there. The one main thing I will urge people to do also when talking about this pole here, it can be very tempting to say, well, I don't need a pole. I got all these trees around. They're nature's poles. I strongly advise against that. One, because if you don't have any kind of baffle or anything on there too, it gives you almost no control over what has access to the nest box. But two, it's actively bad for the tree. The Arbor Day Foundation actually specifically says, please don't nail things to trees. It can kill the tree. However, for what it counts, any of you all who do happen to have dead trees on your property or know somewhere nearby, many of our cavity nesting species here in the Southeast are actually in decline. So that's first and foremost, Carolina chickadees. Bluebirds are doing okay. Our northern flickers and our screech owls are actually having a tough time maintaining their population numbers precisely because northern flickers, they're considered a ecosystem engineer, if I remember the term right. They're the ones that do the majority of excavation of nests that other birds use. And what they need are native hardwoods. You never guess by the name, but they have some pretty hard wood. And so often the flickers will strongly prefer and select dead, slightly rotted trees to be able to make their nest cavities in, just because it's that much easier to be able to hammer their way in and excavate a cavity. And the birds that depend on them to do that need that. If there's not any flickers around making nest cavities for them, they can't use it either. You know, a screech owl is going to have a hard time beating its face into a tree to make a home. So if you all happen to have any deadfalls that are not deadfalls, but dead trees that are not in immediate danger of crashing into your home or car or anything like that, I strongly recommend, as long as you feel comfortable doing so, leave it up because it may not look that pretty, but that can do a lot of good for the birds in your area. So I think it's about as condensed as I can get on this. How's my time doing?
How about and then maybe if anybody has questions?
Yeah, by all means, toss them up. But what you got, Tim? Okay, hummingbirds are not cavity nesters, although as you, those of you who've been to the farmer's market and seen my tiny little bird houses that I make, it's just little ornaments. Everybody asks, oh, is this a hummingbird birdhouse? I very sadly have to say no each time. They make their nests usually on a small fork in a tree. They weave it together from lichen, spider webs, some moss if they can get it, things like that. But they nest out in the open effectively in a little cup. Was there any other species you would include in that? Yeah. They'll try. Yeah. I mean, for what it counts, I really cannot extol the virtues of one of these babies enough. I have a couple bird feeders set up, much like this that I've designed and printed out myself with my 3D printers at home. And I've yet to have a single squirrel on any of them, so long as I have the baffle on and follow the 5-7-9. It's really handy. What you got? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I sometimes wonder if they can link their fingers together on the other side and just shimmy up that way. Yeah. I'll get you just one sec. For what it counts, this is a 6-inch diameter. And if anybody's having trouble, this I consider good for squirrels, snakes, and most raccoons that have come around my place at least. But if y'all have persistent big ones at your place, it's very easy to make this out of an 8-inch diameter section and keep them off that way too. It's just a question of how much that's called for. I haven't tried it for myself yet, but who knows? They may force my hand at some point.
I have 5 bird feeders on my deck as close as I am to you.
Mm.
watched while I read them on papers. The last one that I bought is supposed to be for bluebirds. It's blue. I fill it every morning. It's very expensive, so I knew worms. The bluebirds will come and eat things on my railing, and they just look at that. I've never had a bluebird go up and eat. So if you don't mind repeating that, because that'll be interesting.
Yeah, the question is basically if you're setting out, you said dried mealworms specifically, yeah, something specifically for the bluebirds, why would they just be ignoring it when there's this great source of food right there? I guess the number one question I ask is, have you fed them live mealworms before? What I found in my backyard, I set out, for instance, dried black soldier fly larvae. They're like mealworms, but they're similar in protein and fats, but they have a lot more calcium. And so they're better for them when this time of year when they're trying to build up their calcium reserves for laying eggs and things. The main thing that I've found is you have to kind of transition into the dried worms. With something that's alive and sort of wriggling there right in front of them, it's very easy for them to be like, ah, I know what that is. That's food. And you sort of train them to understand it may not be moving, but it's still edible. Now, granted, if the birds, this time of year, for instance, they want something really fatty. So for instance, like I make a spreadable no-melt suet that I call bird butter that's really thick and hearty and got a little bit of grit in there to help clear out their crops and all that. And they devour that like bird piranha. But if you're setting out something that's not immediately clear to them it's food, at the very least, give them a little time to get used to the idea. But I would suggest in your specific case, setting out some live ones first. The only thing is I don't know how much you said it was a tube feeder? Did I understand that right? Yeah. I don't know how much that lends itself to them sort of immediately recognizing it as food. But you can always try sprinkling some of them out on the rail. And, the thing is, birds, sometimes they have a little bit of what's called neophobia, fear of anything that's new or novel, just because in the wild they can learn that that's something to be avoided. But give them enough time, eventually they tend to figure it out. I think the question is, who has more patience, you or them? So, but thankfully, there are plenty of other foods that you can set out to get their attention. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, to some degree too, birds are individuals and they all have their own particular tastes and preferences. So I don't know, maybe jazz it up with a little garnish or something like that. Yes.
Woman in Oak Ridge that rescued songbirds 15 years ago, and I heard her called Bird Baby.
Don't tell my wife that. Oh yeah, apparently about a decade and a half ago, you said somebody was doing rehabilitation of songbirds or passerines, and who let herself be known as the Oak Ridge Bird Lady.
Yeah. My husband brought a baby bird to her with my two little boys, partly to meet her and rescue the bird. I found out about her that way. He was sure it was a bluebird, and she very sternly told him that it was a starling.
Yeah.
And she did not rescue starlings.
Yes.
And but because the two little boys were there, she took it in and said she was going to.
No thoughts on that one whatsoever. I would say for anybody, if you do happen to find a wild animal, particularly birds, but really anything that is injured and you believe has a chance to survive, not to be grim, but this is nature. The UT Vet Hospital has a wildlife center where I actually took a hawk in there the other day that I found stuck on a fence. And even, they have both the abilities to help when they can, but more importantly, they know the network of wildlife rehabbers. They can either take the animal from you and give them to them or connect you with them directly too. Unfortunately, I don't think there's a sort of centralized resource where you can find wildlife rehabbers in your area that's kept terribly up to date. So I would automatically just go to UT Vet Hospital first thing with that sort of stuff. Yeah, I'll repeat it up here. So the question is basically, if you're only seeing a couple, I'd say this for any species, yeah, because I think this applies, but hummingbirds in this particular case, through the beginning of the year till say the middle of summer, only seeing one or two, and then suddenly it seems like a million show up. Basically what happens is they all fledged. So previously it was just mom and dad coming by the feeders to get a little extra fuel while they were going about getting all the things they need to raise the kids. But then suddenly the kids are up and out of the house and having to find their own way in the world. Also, sometimes birds that have successfully nested further north, because some birds will make more than one brood per year, but some will stick with just one. And so either if their nest fails, or if they successfully fledge their young and say, all right, get out of here, I don't need to take care of y'all anymore, they can start coming south and sort of, instead of feeling like they need to rush down to Mexico in September, for instance, they can take a nice leisurely pace making their way through the southeast. Sorry? Oh, sorry. So here's why I put on my behavioral ecologist hat. The question is, do hummingbirds actually flock? I would say hummingbirds definitely aggregate, in that if there is one centralized resource, it will draw in large numbers simply to take advantage of that. But to the best of my knowledge, they do not seek out other members of their species in order to form cohesive social groups. I know you must have a pretty good spot. That'll do it. Yeah, I was going to say. Yeah, for the folks at home, this is a follow-up on the question about the dried mealworms for bluebirds. We got one other saying that I guess the gist I would take from that is basically, again, the birds at a particular place, both the individual birds and just at a given site, are going to have their own preferences, things they're used to, things that they prefer. And so don't hesitate to just kind of mix and match or try new things until you find something that they really seem to enjoy. And not to make it seem too difficult, but their tastes can change with the season and stuff like that too. So, Dan, if you don't mind. Yeah, I was going to say, we'll toss to the back there. Jim, last question, and then Dan afterwards. And of course, for anybody that has any other questions, I'll be around afterwards, and y'all can also come pick up a business card with all my contact information. So the question is, how do I make these?
And so you're going to pay him for that, right?
Yeah. Plants are great. So I design this with software. You'll be very surprised. I use Fusion 360. It's basically a three-dimensional CAD program that you can download for free. I have a bunch of different criteria that I put into, which is why I talk about the things that birds are looking for when they select a nest box or nesting cavity. So I run it through this program, and then I run it through another program called Cura, which is what converts a file of a three-dimensional shape into a series of slices that you can then put on a flash drive and stick into your 3D printer. And the program turns it into the exact instructions based on the model of printer that you have and various criteria like nozzle temperature and extrusion speed and things like that. So this guy here, right here, for instance, the body takes about 18 hours to print, and the door takes about 4.5. It was only 4, but then I put in steps and decided to make it difficult for me. The nice thing about doing it in this way too is, besides this nice rich brown that I've got right here, you can also make this in, for instance, I provide these guys in beige, light brown, this dark brown, gray, and camo green. The feeders that I make, for instance, they come in a lot of bright colors. I've got a whole rainbow for them. But with the nest box, you specifically want to have it in something that actually doesn't draw a whole lot of attention. If animals cue in on saying, bright colors mean there's food here, you don't want them thinking baby birds are that food they're looking for. They can figure that out on their own, unfortunately. Is that about all we have time for? Okay.
And if you have more questions,
yeah, I'm happy to hang around. And again, I've got contact information over on the side. But thank you all very much.
Lucas, thanks for coming today. That was very interesting.